And so thank you all for joining us, including Joe, who's in the car, driving along rural South Dakota. I've done that. Your state is a little flat, not as flat as North Dakota, but it's been interesting. So, so thank you for joining us on the Inclusive Field call. It's lots of transition time, so we're getting ready for the summit. Hopefully everybody's gotten their invitation or seen the link for the ESHIP summit and signing up or signed up. And there are scholarships available for those who are coming and would like to be considered for a scholarship. Please feel free to apply. It is limited, but they are available. Inclusive Field. We had this robust conversation last time, and Faye had interjected and assisted in some of the language around what it means to be regenerative, I think is one of the words that she used, which is very poignant and gives us a different scope. But before we dive into conversation, I would like to have you kind of check in. And I asked you a question this time, which is a little different from the question I asked last time. So last time it was, what do people not know about you by looking at you? So this time, I'd love for you to tell us what people think or assume just by looking at you. So I'm Cecilia, and I'm the ESHIP community activator focused on ecosystem builders. And being Asian, a lot of the times people assume I'm good at math, and I don't totally suck at math, but it's not my strong suit. So I will call on Joe.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, so you can't see my face today, but you can see a picture of me. So I think when people first see me, they probably assume that I'm a little nerdy. They're actually right about that. And they probably assume that I've had, especially if they are a woman or a person of color, they assume I've had some advantages that they haven't had just because of the way I look, and they'd be right about that as well.
Okay, and I'm going to help Joe out because he can't see who's on the screen. So let's go with Paula.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, good. I don't really know. I mean, I sometimes am told that I look a bit younger than my actual years, and that's fine. I am a grandma, and that's probably the most exciting part of my everyday life. But I'm also very focused on my work and love being here at SourceLink, and have had a very long career. I guess one of the issues that might go along with the grandma and work issue is some of the ageism that I know have experienced in my life, more recently, of course, and being dismissed, perhaps, or feeling like I've been dismissed because of my age. So, you know, that's some of the issues that I think might happen as first glance.
Cool. I am Tyler LeCompte in Daytona Beach, Florida. Sorry I missed the last call. And you probably wouldn't know by looking at me that I play a mean tuba.
So what do people assume about you? just by looking at you?
I'd rather not guess. Honestly, I'd rather not guess. I try to not think about it. It's one of the few things I don't worry myself with. So.
So, okay.
Nobody loves to call in.
So let's see, let's take a look at the ESHIP goals around inclusive field. So can you see the inclusive field screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we have 3 initiatives. They're in varying states of preparedness, and what we're trying to do is focus on diverse leadership around national resource providers and how that can happen, and an ecosystem builders speaker bureau, and then diverse ecosystem builder fellowship. And it changed around a little bit from some of the stuff that we had talked about. So it's about cohort fellowship program for ecosystem builders. I'm trying to see if I have here. Sorry, I have. So this is a new tool that Christine helped me with. It's called the Great Suspender. And this is for when you're not using certain tabs that it kind of suspends them so that you're not using up a lot of energy. So it's kind of interesting. So some of my apps fall asleep. So there are initiatives behind each of these things. And what we had started out was an ecosystem builder accelerator, and that's changed into a fellowship. And I wish that the people that were on the initiative part of the call was going to be here. Out of these 3, whether it's the diverse representation among national resource providers, or diverse speaker bureau, or ecosystem builder fellowship, what is something that speaks to you and you're interested in, so we can maybe talk about that a little bit on the call? Any votes?
Can you mention those 3 again? I don't have the screen in front of me.
Okay, so I'll actually put them in. If you look on the dashboard, actually, what it has is and Joe, for you as you're driving along. So I'll read the first description goal. The ensure diverse national resource provider leadership is supporting a network of ESHIP national resource providers, NRPs, to ensure that their leadership and boards are intentionally diverse and inclusive. So I'll talk about that for a second in a minute. The second one is Ecosystem Builder Speakers Bureau is a database of speakers that include an intentionally inclusive and diverse set of individuals from across ecosystem building fields. And then third would be the Diverse Ecosystem Builder Fellowship, which is a cohort fellowship program for ecosystem builders that come from groups often underrepresented in entrepreneurship. For the first 2, I want you to think about a couple of conversations that I've had recently. When we talk about diverse and intentionally inclusive representation and leadership, it doesn't just mean major identity markers, right? We focus on major identity markers, and it's important to focus on those, but it's not specific and solely about their gender, their race. It's different perspectives, such as people that come from policymaking versus educators and practitioners that do different things, rural versus urban. Then the other part, the other facet of that is when you have those people that are diverse in simply those ways, right? You can actually have a room full of people that come from different perspectives, and it is inclusive, except for the fact that you can have them all be one gender, one race, and it would be diverse. And you have to ask yourself, is that enough? So that's a really interesting dynamic. Does anybody have any thoughts around that?
So, okay. I'm trying to visualize what it was you just said. So it is possible to have a room that represents an underrepresented group inside an ecosystem, but everyone in that room would also be the same of another thing.
Yes. So if it's all guys in the room, right, but you have policymakers and educators and rural and urban, they could all be male and around the same age range.
Yeah.
And so that balance looks.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's an idea that most people don't have, I think. I think that's not the natural destination when somebody says underrepresented individuals. I guess our traditional human instincts are to go first gender and then racial, then think I'm a teacher and you're a doctor and you're an engineer, and together we're the village people. Yeah. Okay.
I agree. It's not enough. I was first thinking, maybe it depends on your goal. I mean, if your goal is about developing policy, it's nice to have some experts in the room. It's nice to have a diverse amount of expertise in the room, which I think is what you were saying, is that, yes, it's nice to be able to have a diverse group of experts, but it's not enough.
Yeah. I don't even know that it's enough to have every single potential variable represented, even if they're doing the same thing. So now you have a room full of people where every flavor and form is represented, but they all do the same job. Is that not
fair enough?
Is that not also not inclusive? So yeah, I think that's one of those.
That's why we have focus groups. I mean, that's why we actually have a diverse amount of input. I mean, there's no one time,
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like you only do this once. We have, segments of population, and those segments can be anywhere from anything demographically or geographically or psychographically. And I'm not looking to overcomplicate this, but I think that you have to have your end game in mind to be able to have the kind of leadership forums that represent a variety of any of those segments.
So, Joe, what do you think of all this?
Yeah, thanks. So I think, yes, I agree with both. I agree with both of those perspectives. I think it's not enough on either end, I guess, is what I'm saying. It's not enough to have a room full, a colorful room that is all people with the same sort of experiences and backgrounds. And it's not enough to have the thing that we actually have really often in rural communities. The thing I'm always trying to push harder on is we often have what people in the room will call a diverse group, and we're all white, right? And so that's the one of the things I'm often pushing the hardest on is like, this is not enough. Yes, maybe we are diverse in economic status, we're diverse in professional backgrounds, we're diverse in experiences, diverse in gender. Those are sort of the check boxes that we can mark off in rural and feel pretty proud of ourselves, and it's still not enough. There's still people missing. We have to push way to the edges. I think that's always the thing that is the challenge, and that's what I think the challenge is for this group, this goal. is to say, yes, there are lots of different kinds of diversity and lots of different kinds of inclusion, and it's always about pushing further to the edge. Who's still not here?
Yeah, so I see Eric joined us. Hello, Eric.
Yes, hi. Sorry I'm late.
No, that's all right. Absolutely. We're just glad you're here. So, I think that, when we talk about is it enough to have diverse representation in certain segments, but not in all. Faye, who's been on the calls before, actually wrote a blog on LinkedIn. So I'm going to share that in the Slack channel, and Joe, I'll send it all in an email. So she wrote a thing about fake equity. And fake equity, some of us are familiar with as kind of the checkbox of what we do. So to Joe's point, when we have people that are representative of different segments, but not all the players, then it's a checkbox thing, so that we're feeling like, yeah, we got everyone in the room that we needed to, but it's not all, right? So it reminds me of a story. Has anybody ever read the Chaos Imperative? It's an Ori Braham book.
Nope.
So he talks about getting people in the room that aren't represented. Anytime that they would have a meeting and get people in the room, anytime someone said, and those people, they would stop the meeting and get those people in the room, so that they really had representation in that way. So there's an interesting story about them working in a hospital. In the hospital that they were working in, they were having an issue with the infectious disease wing, and the doctors and the nurses and the staff and all of that were talking about, what they need to do. They couldn't get hot water to the wing, and so as they're going through this renovation, and it was going to cost them millions of dollars to make sure that they had the plumbing with the hot water and all of that in the room, in the wing. Somewhere along the way, one of the janitors turned around and said, I think this is probably a silly question, but has anybody checked the valve? And so they all stopped and walked into the janitorial closet and looked to see that the valve that released the hot water was not turned on, right? So if you didn't have the janitor in the room, it would have cost millions of dollars. Doctors and nurses and administration staff don't think about those things, right? But because you had that representation. So it's just a bizarre little story, but the idea is that you had that. So what's up, Tyler?
No, that was interesting. So it kind of brings up the point that in that kind of a process, it's never ending now. Right? You never get to a point where, either the lesson there is this is never going to end, or this is something so simple it probably should have just been taken care of. So I like where you're going with that, but I think that misses somewhere, because it kind of doesn't. I think ultimately we're trying to define the value and making sure that even when somebody isn't represented in a conversation, that their lack of input this particular time is recognized and made sure that it's taken care of next time, right? That it doesn't get too far down the track with that person, and again, this is a generalization, person's opinion, isn't underrepresented across the board, right? Is that what you're saying?
I think that we focus a lot on underrepresented, right? We have to focus on, can everybody who's not talking be on mute, so that we can kind of turn down a little bit of the noise on the thing, but you're fine. Joe, you're driving. I just want you to be able to drive safely. So thank you.
I'm no longer driving. I'm parked.
Okay.
So.
All right. Yay. So is it never ending? Yes. Does it mean that we get to a certain quota? Is a third of the room? Is a half of the room? Is it enough? I think that for me, as a person who focuses on belonging, I just want to make sure that we keep that top of mind, so that you're looking around the room constantly and saying to yourself, who's not here that should be here, right? So in every meeting, who are we missing? And that's the underrepresented, right? The person who's not there. And Joe, so now that you've stopped, I'm really curious to hear what you think about the idea of represented, not represented.
There, I was trying to find the mute button. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I'm kind of really intrigued by that idea of whenever somebody says those people, we got to go find those people, because I think that's what often happens is we forget sometimes even that not the whole system's in the room, and if we don't have the whole system, we're just missing a piece of wisdom. So sometimes we get caught up perhaps in the who's underserved or who's underrepresented and are they here, instead of just thinking about, if we're designing something, if we're creating something, if we're improving something that is for a system, a group of people who are part of a system, and parts of that system, parts of that group are not here, then we're just missing some of that wisdom. We're missing some of that the guy that knows that we got to turn the hot water valve on. And without it, we're going to make mistakes. So the more diverse the room is, it doesn't mean that we can't ever move forward without having everybody represented in the system, but it means that whenever we leave somebody out, or I should say, whenever the more diverse the group is, the better the decision is going to be. The smarter the group is, the more diverse it is. Sometimes I find if we focus more on that, how do we get smarter in our decision making and our creativity, we can get further than, or sort of people might respond to that less with their dukes up than other times when it's about something else, which is also just as important. Like, this is someone who has not had their voice at the table. It's also, the other thing it makes me think about, sorry, I'm going on and on here, but the other thing it makes me think about is I've also heard from people, especially often people who are representing a particular culture, a particular group of people, that they don't get to just show up and be themselves and offer their insights. They have to try, or at least the group is expecting them to represent all the different perspectives of all the people that they quote unquote represent. So I wonder if anybody else on the call has experienced that, and I wonder how we avoid that as well.
The speak for your people thing. Yeah, that's a thing, right? So Paula, speak for all women.
Well, that's, yeah, right. Yeah. I don't know if I mentioned this the last call, but I attended a webinar like this. And the presenter was a woman who was deafblind and talked about being inclusive in your events and conferences. And I was mortified that I had not been more thoughtful about including and being inclusive of people who had physical and mental challenges. So that just opened up the whole an opportunity to think about the words diverse and inclusive. And diverse is, she basically kind of dispelled diverse. She just said, no, diverse is nothing without being inclusive, and gave us pointers on what we could do to make sure that folks who needed some kind of physical assistance or device were included in our gatherings and our efforts. So being in the entrepreneurial space, we have events all the time that we can be more thoughtful about. So no, I don't know if I probably just skipped right over that question that Joe brought up, but no, she did not speak for everybody that needed some kind of device or I'm trying to choose the right words, instruction or invitation. For example, she said that PDF documents are really not helpful to people who need to have translators that are blind to make your documents in Word, because they work better in the device. I mean, who knew any of this stuff? So it just was a bit revealing. So as we talk and as we move forward to show folks in our community and other communities how we need to break down those barriers and be more inclusive, that it really truly is an inclusive effort. And though we may not be able to bring everybody to the table at one time, we can bring people to the table at different times.
I think that's a great point. And those are the things that, you know, there's some grace in that you don't know until you know, right? And then when you know better, you do better. So things like the first ESHIP summit, we didn't have one. The second ESHIP summit, we actually had a quiet room for people who are introverts. So sometimes you just need to get away from the noise and people and all of that. So we wanted to make sure that there was space for people. You talk about access. I know, you know, we do things like we always have meetings downtown during business hours. Well, downtown is not always easy to access. Business hours aren't. We had, for a while, when we did 1 million cups, we had childcare. We don't always now. In a food court just this week, they actually put a baby feeding station, right? A nursing station in that food court. So that's a huge thing. That's being mindful and present. So I'm curious, Eric, I know that being a person of color, you're probably more often asked to represent your people. I know that I am. So how does this conversation resonate with you?
Well, super interesting topic. I'm excited here. I have a few ideas already blowing through my mind. I mean, in context, we see it a lot on our group, the Hispanic group, and the way we handle this, because it looks like we're talking about problem solving. The example you did from the book is pure problem solving, and sometimes the fact that we are subjective, looking for affirmation within the group, whether it's positive or negative, and you know, the lack of humbleness and pride sometimes, you know, take us to a point where the solution never happens, or it's just a superficial solution. So objectiveness is something we always bring to the table. In that sense, our entrepreneurs, you know, I think all entrepreneurs see things positively, and they think they're going to advance. like Mike Tyson said, everyone's got a plan until they're punched in the face. So, and most of entrepreneurs get punched in the face. So, because of that, because when we sit with them, we tell them, I'm not, we're here to give you real support. However, we're not your friends or families. We're gonna tell you the truth. It might be negative sometimes, or with a lot of criticism. That doesn't mean we don't love you or give you support. So in terms of diversion and inclusion, representation of whatever is new, or whatever is it seems to be less important, is sometimes the most important. And as soon as you brought that example for the book, which I already have in my Amazon's list to purchase, it took me to an example on a class one time. The professor said, those are the jobs that are gonna survive in the future. The one that moves because it seems like the other ones, or the subjective ones, are gonna be replaced by technology. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting topic. It takes a perspective from the top. I am like that. I mean, I totally, I'm constantly trying to be that objective in everything. But we are humans. We end up in other in other scenarios. So yeah, it's a very important topic. I think it calls itself for inclusiveness and openness and all of that. And yeah, we as a group, to answer your question, are constantly, treated as exclusive, or or are as as a diverse group. We actually are, officially, but but it's that barrier constantly there, just like Paula said, and got to be open for it.
No, I appreciate your thoughts. We also talk about, so this initiative 1.2, which talks about ecosystem builders from diverse perspectives. So when we were talking, Paula, about diversity, so diversity is a fact, right? I mean, the world is diverse. So diversity isn't even, when I think, if I were the speaker and saying what they did, and kind of dismissing the diversity part, it's like, okay, so the recognition of the pure fact is basically what you're doing. The inclusiveness is the action, right? So we want to approach things in an inclusive way. In my diversity inclusion work, I focus on trying to create a sense of belonging, because I think that when you create a sense of belonging, it brings more people to the table. And when the table's not big enough, then you build a bigger table and you just keep going, right? Or add on to the table. So the database of speakers around ecosystem building field, when we talk about intentionally inclusive and diverse, we want to also talk about not only the major identity markers of diversity, but there's also part of that being not having them speak for all those people that you think that they represent, right? So if I was going to say to Tyler, hey, Tyler, I want you to talk about white guys whose families came from Louisiana and ended up in Florida. Can you just speak about, because that kind of pigeonholes him into that. And he has far greater other things to talk about as well, right? So it's saying, I know people will ask me, so speak to us about being an immigrant or being Asian and growing up, and and I'm like, okay, so
I'm from New York.
I'm from New York, yes. I'm an ecosystem builder. I'd love to talk to you about ecosystem building. I don't want to have to just report, right? So we have Louisa, who's one of our ESHIP champions, is a young Black woman. She's a data geek. So should she talk about being a young Black woman? Yeah, maybe. But you know what? She has so much robust information to share about data, right? And it's so making sure that when we build a speaker bureau, that not only do we ask people that look like Louisa, but we also find out what their skill set is, right? And engaging them to promote the things that they are. So that's really creating that sense of belonging, and putting together this brief. Like, those are the things that we want to be mindful of. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Any other? Yes, go.
Yeah, so yes, it does very much. But I also want to ask a question. So in some cases, it may be that the reason that person is in the speakers bureau or on that board is because of that representation of a particular group. Like, I think of myself, for instance, if someone were to ask me to come speak about ecosystem building and say, well, what's it like to do that in rural places? Well, that is an expertise that I have, and I'm happy to talk about that. And it may be that I'm then expected to represent everybody who's doing that in rural places. But it's also true, like, if someone invited my wife, who also lives in a rural place and has her whole life, but has no idea how to work on ecosystem building and that sort of thing, to represent all of us. So I mean, I want to, like, just hold up, like, yes, there are some times when it is about representing a group of people, not a whole race, not a whole, gender, not a whatever, but a specific. So that didn't sound at all like a question, but I'm really asking, like, how does that play out? Because I'm not usually asked to represent a whole group of people who look like me, right? So how does that, what I'm describing, play out for others on the group?
Gentlemen, you look like you had something to say.
Yeah, I think it brings power to that bureau. I think the fact of each individual to see so much diversity within the own group, and they're all got to be, leading towards the same objective. That simple fact itself brings a lot of empowerment to the group. We've seen it, and we put boards together, small boards, 4 or 5 people, and it's 100% diverse represented, and it's so powerful, and they motivated so much, and I think it's because the same fact. I mean, the fact itself, it brings a lot of empowerment.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah.
So I think the idea of being able to be in the room, right? There are certain times. So Tyler and I had a conversation. We had a couple of hours driving back and forth from Seaside to Portland. So we talked about a lot of things. But there are certain rooms that he can be in that I don't get access to. So it's really important as an ally to have that conversation, right? So he can have the conversations, I can. If he says certain things in a crowd and I say the same things, it's going to be perceived differently, right? I will be the angry brown person. And not that I won't own that if I am the angry brown person, but I have a friend of mine who's a cis white hetero Christian male, who, when he calls out other people that are similarly in his demographic, it's not an attack, it's a calling out, right? It is, well, it's all an attack, but I mean, but it's he's in a position to be able to say certain things to a certain demographic and not be, oh, because you want something from us, or you're attacking us, or you're picking on us. Is that right, Tyler?
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On some level, yeah. We did, and those. Thank you again for those talks, Cecilia. They were great. Often guys that look like me don't get a chance to have conversations like that. So again, thank you. Yeah, it's one of those things that you don't realize it, and I think the best thing that can be done if you're wrapped in a package like me, is to try and be an agent of change, almost a spy. Make your own board of diversity. The people that you trust that don't, like we talked about before. Okay, so we all do the same thing. Fill that room with people that don't look like you that do that same thing, and you can have a diverse opinion about that thing when you go talk. And so now I can take that diverse opinion with me into the room that half of the people in my board can't get into. So that is the real power, I think, that could be communicated, to certain groups, when it comes specifically to the inequality that's occurred due to gender and sexuality and race, etc. I'm on a call. And so, yeah, I think that's the real power here. But again, it's going to be it's a very thin line to walk. So it's, I think the best we can do is just to be consciously aware that anytime we are working on anything, to try and identify what's missing, but identify what's missing without saying those people.
So, yeah.
When we're talking about a speakers bureau, I'm just kind of running through in my mind on how people would access it. And, I work with the Resource Navigator, and for those of you who aren't familiar with the Resource Navigator from SourceLink, it's an online database, and people can develop a customized search for the kinds of resources that they need to help them start and grow businesses. Well, that's kind of how my mind is working in this situation is, okay, how do people access this Speakers Bureau? What do they need? And so perhaps there can be some kind of search item for the kind of speaker that they're looking for. Or, when somebody is invited to select a speaker, that we are very conscientious about what they're asking for. And, the people who are in the database of sorts, whatever it is that we create in the Speakers Bureau, can list a whole bunch of different qualifications, qualities, points of view, whatever it is, expertise, that people can access this particular Speakers Bureau and get the kind of speaker that they want. But there's also the element of surprise too, that is sometimes appropriate, because if you're going to a particular area that don't expect a 70-year-old woman to come into the door and talk about ecosystems or whatever, then it doesn't really matter. It just, they want somebody to talk about ecosystems. So I just think that I'm just a practical person, and I'm thinking about, okay, so how do people access this Speakers Bureau? How are we going to make those matches with the kind of information that people want, with the kind of information that we have available? So
I think some of that, and that's a great, that's a really great perspective. I think that it's really important. So when we talk about Speaker Bureau, I think, and SourceLink being a national resource provider and working on some of the marketplace stuff alongside Kaufman and the co-starters is how do we cross-cut that it's not just this, right? A couple of things I want to throw out there is there's also the receptiveness of the audience really comes into play, right? Because there are people that are just going to be more comfortable with people that look a certain way, sound a certain way, represent in a certain fashion. Whereas if you, so there's a balance that needs to be had, because if you're speaking with someone and your approach isn't similar to theirs, if you don't send an engineer to talk to an engineer group, then they don't hear you because they take in information differently. They're going to dismiss you if you don't have the creds. They're going to look upon you as somebody who just doesn't get, like, it's cool that you have that message. So obviously some of that has to balance with, it's really cool to have you come and speak to our group, you who I didn't think knew about that stuff. But then if the rest of the audience tunes out, then what have you actually accomplished, right? So there's a whole lot of balance there. I want to be really mindful of time, and make sure that all of you are aware of the ESHIP Summit, and that that you've either signed up or have any questions about it, that I'm able to answer those. Registration is open. I'm going to tell you that like last year and the year before, it will sell out, so don't wait. There are scholarships available. If you're looking for a scholarship, you can absolutely feel free to apply. It's the 21st to the 23rd in Kansas City of May, and we're looking forward to having you all there. To give you some update on this stuff that we're talking about, and it's really great to get all your perspectives in, especially if you're working on these initiatives that we've raised up, or would like to work on the initiatives, or partnering with people that are working on initiatives, to have these conversations, because I think that's going to be a helpful resource in making these more robust. These are 3 of about 130 initiatives that were presented by the ESHIP community. We've identified about 30 to 32 of them that have been raised up by ESHIP champions, by people at Kauffman, by other national resource providers, as here's a good starting place to create ecosystem building field. So to that end, what we want to do is make sure that we have some energy behind it. I don't want you to think of ESHIP as the end of these discussions. I want you to think of ESHIP as just a point in time where we all converge and do things that we can only do in person. And then what we're working on doing is having national resource providers such as SourceLink and other organizations that have the bandwidth, the technology, the people power, the funding to be able to put some efforts behind some of these initiatives. So I'm going to invite all of you to be involved and engaged. You've had some conversations around these things now, and decide what you'd like to put your energy towards. And then we're going to get national resource providers along with practitioners to partner together and move these initiatives into a pilot program. So that's the goal. So that starting in June, there's some energy and resources behind these initiatives, and we move them forward just a little bit more. We don't solve for it. It's a work in progress. Everything's a draft, but we move it just a little bit further. So are there any questions?
Yeah, so this is Joe. So I just wondered, like, how do we plug into one of those initiatives?
So right now, on the, I haven't put it in the dashboard. So you have a link to the dashboard, but there's another form that we have going that I will share. It's currently in draft mode,
Okay.
and I'm in the process of updating. So right now the update is through January, and what I'm going to do is is share that update. There's a link. So any of the tabs with the initiatives will actually have a link on it. And I'll email this all out. And then you can click on that, add your name to the list of people that are wanting to be engaged in those. If it's a speaker bureau, if it's, we're going to change that diverse ecosystem builder accelerator to fellowship because it shifted a little bit, but it will be an opportunity to add your name to the conversation. And as you add your name to the conversation, we'll move those efforts forward. Does that work for you, Joe?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? No. All right. Then I'm going to bid you a happy hump day. And we will look forward to seeing you hopefully in Kansas City. If not, towards the end of next month or middle of next month to do this again. All right?
Thanks. I mean, I'm going to Kansas, already registered.
All right. I'm
We'll see you there.
there.
See you there.
Take care.
Can't wait to see everybody.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a great week.